feasibility study, which you can read about in this recent British Medical Journal quality and assurance paper. And we've got something coming out where we found that for 18 of 22 diagnosis categories, not necessarily mental health, just general diagnosis categories, some of them are mental health, depression, anxiety was in there. We can predict across users whether somebody has the diagnosis better than knowing their age, gender, and race can predict. So we see that there's signal in there, at least at distinguishing people, and that it's valuable to look further as we did with this workshop. So I'm going to turn it over to Glenn now to talk about our other awesome data set.
I'm back again, sorry guys. So some of the data that we had available is sort of what we've been publishing on for the last couple of years in this space is Twitter data that comes from people that had self-stated a diagnosis. So they had said something like this publicly on Twitter. And so I was finally diagnosed with panic disorder, or they diagnosed me with generalized anxiety disorder, and I had pills, blah, 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 blah. Okay. So they're making a very overt statement about what their mental health diagnosis is and providing that publicly. So why would somebody do this? It seems like counterintuitive, but there's a lot of movement underway to sort of fight stigma and to say, like, listen, you know, 1 in 4 and 1 in 5, like, there's a lot of people that have various mental health conditions. And so there are people that are getting more active and being more proactive in talking about these things. And so why would someone do that to begin with? It's to, in some cases, to build a community. In some cases, it's to explain some actions they've been taking. In some cases, it's to provide a place to reach out for help or to provide help and sort of justification, validation for someone else who is talking about something similar. So we've been collecting this data for a number of years, and what we did for this workshop is took a subset of this data for a couple of the conditions that there were significant temporal aspects to the conditions as far as our psychological experts told us, and anonymized them and brought them over here so that we could all work on them. So if anyone is part of the CLSP, that data is going to live here for a couple of years, and so there's more follow-on work that can happen. There's some special access stuff around that, so if you're interested in it, let's talk about it. Let's get you access to it so you can do some work here. And similarly, we have this for suicide attempts, where people have stated publicly on Twitter that something like, you know, it's been a year since my suicide attempt. Oh my goodness, how much has my life changed? Or, you know, something like this, where they've been they lost their phone after a suicide attempt, and so they were unable to communicate or explaining why they were gone. This is a very similar phenomenon as the last one. The difference here is that they give us some really specific temporal information. And so they give us enough information to know when they attempted suicide. In some cases, we only get, like, you know, a rough month boundary. In some cases, we actually get the exact day. And again, this is public data, so we then go back and look at as much public data as we can prior to that date and have amassed a corpus of people where effectively we have their data prior to a suicide attempt, we know the date of their attempt, and we have some data from them afterwards. So all these people have survived their attempts, which means it's slightly different from what you might consider from some of the other studies, like Craig Bryant's study, looking at people that had died by suicide in particular. Right? So this might be a slightly different population. There's a whole bunch of things. In all these cases, we understand a little bit about this, but part of the really exciting reason for this summer and for all of us coming together this summer is to pair up these two data sets. And so we've got a lot of information coming from Twitter and from these self-stated diagnoses, but we don't have clinical validation. We don't have medical records to go with them. And the Somiome, yeah, right, brought this data that has Facebook data and some clinical validation. And so either one of these things alone doesn't quite cut it for what we want, but together they're really quite powerful. There's a third source that we got a little bit of data from. They came in sort of late for the summer, so we didn't do a whole lot of work with it, but this is from donated data at ourdatahelps.org. And so this is a place that we've been talking about at suicide prevention conferences, and some of the people from our clinical panel are evangelists for this sort of thing. It's a place where people can go and sign up and donate their data and provide a short mental health, answer a short mental health questionnaire. And so we get some people where we know the date of their suicide attempt because they've told us. They haven't posted publicly on Twitter, but they've told us in our web forum the date on which they attempted suicide and provided some other information. So there is a minor amount of data from that as well. So what does this look like? It's overwhelmingly female, almost 80% female. Right? So it's clearly not a representative sample of the world, of the US, of Twitter, of anything. Right? It is biased in some interesting ways. The age distribution is over here on the left, and you can see that it roughly follows the age distribution of what you'd expect on Twitter, right? Largely younger. And you can see the counts for the 5 conditions that we looked at. These don't exactly line up with what Andy talked about, but it's pretty close. And so importantly, Andy's diagnosis, the Somiome data, not Andy, he didn't diagnose any people. The Somiome data has the labels applied for insurance purposes. And the self-stated data, the quantified self-stated data, has data that has labels that are applied by the people when talking about the condition. So these are actually not entirely one-to-one mappings. So you'll see we conflate a couple of these categories as we go forward. But this is part of the brilliance of this workshop. The Somiome data, you can see these dark blue lines at the bottom here, right? We have a small number of these people relative to what we can find in the self-stated data. But we have clinical validation for that. We don't have necessarily a ton of language from them, but we have a ton more language from the Twitter people. So there's a great story to hear. If we can line these things up and say, like, listen, these things really do mean roughly the same thing. We can really learn from one and predict on the other. If there's some clinical validation here, we unlock a whole lot more information, a whole lot more language, a whole lot more behavioral data to address all of these questions and get at the lethal gap. So the rest of this talk is going to be, we're going to fill out this matrix for you. We set out to tackle 2 main ideas here. The first is clinical validation of some of the stuff that we're looking at. The second is examining behavior over time, language over time. And for all these cases, we did the sort of traditional computer science thing. We tried to do some prediction, get a number that we can drive up, or at least get a number. Maybe we can just get a number. That's kind of cool. Maybe we drove up a couple of them. Some of them we drove down, and that's just the way that science goes, right? But the other side of it, and this is like the clinical panel portion of this, we wouldn't accept any result that didn't provide some psychological insight. And so actually what you're going to see today is a bunch of psychological insight and a little bit of interesting prediction. So we all learned a whole lot about what mental health and behavior looks like this summer. And as far as I know, we know more about it now than anybody else in the world, and that's kind of cool. I know we're telling you guys now, so you all know it too. So without further ado, we're going to start in on this matrix and start off with some clinical validation stuff. So I mentioned that we've done a bunch of work on this previously. This is a subset of the papers that are looking at, this is what we've done with some of the self-stated diagnosis data prior to having any clinical validation. And we can get you papers. If you want anything, come find me. We'll be able to point you around PDSR and stuff. So don't bother taking notes. So we tried to do basically 4 things in with this data previously. This is almost, because we didn't have clinical validation, this is the best that we could do. So we tried to attack it from many different angles. Examine this idea that there is mental health signals encoded in the social media data and try to pull out from that, make sure that it looks valid to the many ways that we could measure it. So in all these cases, we're able to find some quantifiable signals that are relevant to mental health. And that's interesting, right? All these papers. In some of them, we set out to replicate linguistic differences that are found by others. There's been a lot of work by like Luke and Jamie Pennybaker and Molly and others in this, the Penn people as well, and Moon Deshouder from Georgia Tech. There's a bunch of people that have done work in this space and have looked at people where they have some, like, what's the difference between someone who has depression and someone who doesn't? What's the difference in their language? And they published on linguistic differences. And so we spent a lot of time effectively replicating those differences on our data sets. And for the most part, they line up. The third is we answer the question, can classifiers or regressors separate the users? And so this is basically, can you train a machine learning algorithm to say, is this person schizophrenic or neurotypical? And so that works in a lot of cases, in almost all cases. Just not seasonal affected disorder. Don't know why. Can't figure that one out. And then the last one is, can we find expected patterns in the real world? So in a lot of these cases, we try to do some prediction. Based on what we know, can we see, one example is we have a PTSD classifier. Do we see higher rates of PTSD on military bases than in civilian population areas, right? There's a bunch of these sorts of things. We try to do some predictive, show some predictive validity. Any one of these things has problems with it, but sort of the collection of them has been the closest we can get to validating that this is right, until now. So we have ROC curves that do some things. If you guys look at ROC curves, none of these are the sorts that are going to change the world, but all of them are very interesting and decidedly non-random. So we have, these are 10 conditions, 9 of which we can do something sensible for, and then plus suicide attempts. And this is basically all the ROC curves that have been put together over from all of those papers we mentioned previously. So there's signal that we found previously in all of these conditions. This is for separating a person with this condition from their matched neurotypical controls. So what exactly have we done here for clinical validation? And we'll let Patrick come up and talk about it.